The flash drive felt like a grenade in Brielle Garrison's coat pocket as she walked through the chrome and marble lobby of Ellington Pharmaceuticals, her heels echoing against the polished floor with each step that might be her last in this building. She had worked here for 3 years as a senior research analyst, loved her job, believed in the mission, and now she was about to destroy everything because the alternative was letting thousands of people die from a drug that should never reach the market. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor felt longer than usual. Her reflection stared back at her from the mirrored walls. A 27-year-old woman with dark hair pulled into a professional bun, green eyes that hadn't slept properly in weeks, and a face that had learned to hide fear behind composure. The clinical trial data she had discovered 3 weeks ago sat encrypted on the drive in her pocket, showing that the company's flagship cardiac medication caused fatal complications in a significant percentage of patients, complications that had been deliberately excluded from the reports submitted to the FDA. She had tried going through internal channels first. Her direct supervisor had told her she was misreading the data. The ethics hotline had gone silent after her initial call. The head of research had scheduled a meeting with her and then canceled it 4 times. That's when Brielle understood that this wasn't incompetence or miscommunication. This was conspiracy, and it went high enough that her attempts to fix it from within were being actively suppressed. So she was going to the top. To Griffin Eastwood himself, the billionaire CEO who had inherited the company from his father 2 years ago at 32, and had been featured in Forbes for turning around the company's declining profits. She had never met him, had only seen him in company-wide meetings broadcast to the various floors. A tall figure with dark hair and sharp features who spoke about innovation and integrity. She was about to find out if those words meant anything. The executive floor was quieter, more refined, with artwork on the walls that probably cost more than her annual salary. The receptionist, a polished woman in her 50s, looked up with professional courtesy. "I need to see Mr. Eastwood," Brielle said, her voice steadier than she felt. "It's urgent. Do you have an appointment?" "No, but this cannot wait. I'm Brielle Garrison from the research division. Tell him I have information about the cardio-safe trials that he needs to see immediately." Something in her tone must have conveyed the gravity because the receptionist's polite smile faltered. She picked up the phone, spoke in low tones, listened, then looked up with surprise. "Mr. Eastwood will see you now, through those doors, last office on the right." Brielle's heart hammered as she walked down the corridor. The door to Griffin Eastwood's office was open, and she could see him standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city, his back to her, phone pressed to his ear. He was taller than she had realized, broad-shouldered in a perfectly tailored navy suit, his posture straight and commanding even in this private moment. "I don't care what the timeline was," he was saying, his voice deep and edged with frustration. "If the quality is not there, we delay. I'm not putting my name on something substandard." He turned as he spoke and saw her in the doorway, his eyes meeting hers directly. They were a striking gray-blue, intense and assessing. He held up one finger, indicating she should wait. "We'll discuss this Monday. No compromises on this." He ended the call and set the phone on his desk. "Miss Garrison, my assistant said this was urgent regarding Cardio Safe. That's our most important project. What's the problem?" Brielle stepped into the office and the door clicked shut behind her. This was the moment. Once she said this, there was no taking it back. "Mr. Eastwood, Cardio Safe is killing people in the trials, and someone in this company is covering it up." His expression didn't change immediately, but she saw his jaw tighten, saw the way his eyes sharpened with focus. That's a serious accusation. Sit down and explain exactly what you mean." She moved to the chair across from his desk, pulled out the flash drive, and set it on the polished wood surface between them. "3 weeks ago, I was doing secondary analysis on the Phase 3 trial data. I found discrepancies in the adverse event reports. When I pulled the raw data, I discovered that 17 participants had died from cardiac events during the trial, but only 3 were reported in the official summary. The other 14 were classified as pre-existing conditions or excluded on technicalities. But I traced the medical records, Mr. Eastwood. These people died because of the drug, not despite it. Cardio-safe causes fatal arrhythmias in approximately 8% of patients with a specific genetic marker that wasn't screened for." Griffin was very still, his eyes on the flash drive, then on her face. "You have proof of this. Everything is on that drive." "Raw data, my analysis, the original medical reports versus the summaries that were submitted. I tried to report this internally, but every channel I went through either ignored me or shut me down. I think whoever is behind this has enough power in the company to suppress this information, which is why I'm bringing it directly to you." "Why?" The question was sharp. "If what you're saying is true and there's a conspiracy at high levels of this company, how do you know I'm not part of it?" Brielle met his gaze steadily. "Because if you are, then I've already lost, and thousands of people are going to die when this drug hits the market. But I've read your interviews, Mr. Eastwood. I've heard you talk about your mother dying from a medication error when you were in college, about how that's what drove you to transform this company's safety culture. So either you meant all of that, or you're a sociopath who has been performing for the press for 2 years. I'm betting on the former." For a long moment, Griffin Eastwood said nothing, his expression unreadable. Then he picked up the flash drive and plugged it into his laptop. "Walk me through it." For the next 2 hours, Brielle showed him everything. The spreadsheets with participant IDs and outcomes. The medical records she had obtained through the research database. The statistical analysis proving the correlation was not coincidental. The email trails showing her supervisor had been aware of her concerns and had deliberately dismissed them. Griffin asked questions, sharp and incisive questions that proved he understood the science and the implications. He made notes, cross-referenced her data with files from his own system, and his expression grew darker with each revelation. "This is fraud," he said finally, leaning back in his chair. "FDA fraud, which is federal. If cardio-safe is approved based on falsified data and people die, we're not just looking at civil liability. This is criminal." "I know," Brielle said quietly. "That's why I came to you. This has to be stopped before the FDA approval hearing next month." Griffin looked at her, really looked at her, and something shifted in his expression. "You know what you're risking bringing this to me? If this gets out, you'll be the whistleblower on a major scandal. Your career in pharmaceuticals could be over. People will call you a traitor, a troublemaker. You'll be sued, investigated, dragged through depositions, and probably years of legal proceedings. You could have just quit, walked away, not been connected to any of this." "People will die," Brielle said simply. "I can't live with that. I can get another job. I can't get another conscience." Something in Griffin's face softened, just for a moment, a crack in the executive armor. "What's your background, Miss Garrison? How did you end up in my research division?" The question surprised her. "I have a PhD in biostatistics from Johns Hopkins. I wanted to work for a company that was doing meaningful research, making drugs that actually helped people. Ellington had that reputation. That's why this matters so much to me." Griffin nodded slowly, then made a decision. She could see it happen, the way his shoulders squared and his jaw set. "I believe you. I don't know yet how deep this goes or who all is involved, but I believe your data is accurate, and I believe you're bringing this to me in good faith. As of right now, cardio-safe development is suspended pending a complete audit. I'm bringing in an outside forensic team to go through every piece of data. And Miss Garrison, he stood up, extending his hand across the desk. Thank you for having the courage to do this and for giving me the chance to make it right. Brielle stood and shook his hand, feeling the firm strength of his grip, the calluses that suggested he did more than push papers despite his position. Thank you for listening, Mr. Eastwood. Call me Griffin, he said. Something tells me we're going to be working closely on this, and formality seems unnecessary when you've just saved my company from committing mass negligent homicide. That was Tuesday. By Wednesday afternoon, Brielle had been moved to a private office on the executive floor, assigned a security detail after Griffin insisted that people willing to commit fraud might not stop at intimidation, and brought into meetings with the forensic accounting team Griffin had flown in from D.C. The audit was expanding rapidly, as they discovered the data falsification went beyond just excluding adverse events. Trial participants had been selectively enrolled based on genetic profiles that made complications less likely. Dosage information had been manipulated, and follow-up periods had been strategically shortened to avoid capturing delayed adverse reactions. This wasn't one person making bad choices, Griffin said Thursday evening, standing at the whiteboard in his office where they had mapped out the timeline and key players. His tie was loosened, his sleeves rolled up, revealing muscular forearms that Brielle had been trying not to notice. This was coordinated, sophisticated, and involved at minimum 5 people in positions of significant authority. Brielle studied the board, her mind working through the connections. Your chief medical officer had to be involved. Dr. Harrington signs off on all trial protocols and data submissions. Your VP of Research, Marcus Chen, he would have controlled access to the raw data, and someone in regulatory affairs had to prepare the falsified documents for the FDA. Jennifer Walsh, Griffin said grimly. She's been with the company for 15 years, came up through the ranks with my father. I trusted her completely. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration that made him seem more human, less like the untouchable billionaire CEO. This is going to destroy people's lives. These are colleagues, some of them friends, but they made their choices. Are you having second thoughts? Brielle asked carefully. Griffin turned to look at her, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. No, absolutely not. What they did was unconscionable. I'm angry that I didn't catch this myself, that I was so focused on the business side of turning this company around that I didn't look closely enough at the research division. That ends now. They ordered dinner to be delivered to the office because the work couldn't stop, and Brielle found herself sitting across from Griffin at his conference table, eating Thai food from takeout containers and talking about more than just the scandal. He asked about her research, her background, what had drawn her to biostatistics. She found herself telling him about growing up in Michigan, about her father who had been a high school science teacher and had instilled in her a love of understanding how things worked, about losing him to cancer when she was 23 and how that had driven her to want to make a difference in medicine. He would be proud of you, Griffin said quietly. What you're doing here, standing up when it would have been easier to look away, that takes character. What about you? Brielle asked, emboldened by his openness. You took over this company at 32 when you could have done anything with your life. Why pharmaceuticals? Griffin's expression darkened slightly. My mother, like I mentioned in that interview you read, she was prescribed a medication that interacted with something else she was taking. Her doctor didn't catch it, the pharmacist didn't catch it, and she had a massive stroke. She was 54 years old and had no other health problems. She should have lived for decades more. He paused, looking down at his hands. My father never recovered from losing her. He threw himself into the company, drove himself into the ground trying to build something that would prevent what happened to her from happening to anyone else. When he died of a heart attack 2 years ago, the company was failing despite his efforts. The board wanted to sell, break it up for parts. I convinced them to give me 2 years to turn it around. And you did, Brielle said. The stock price has tripled. At what cost? Griffin's voice was bitter. If I pushed so hard for profits that it created an environment where people thought they had to falsify data to meet targets, then I'm complicit in this, Brielle. I built the pressure that led to this. No, Brielle said firmly. You set high standards, but what they did was their choice. They could have come to you and said the timeline was unrealistic or the results weren't there yet. Instead, they chose to lie and put lives at risk. That's on them, not you. Griffin looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable in his expression. You have a lot of faith in people doing the right thing. I have faith in you doing the right thing, Brielle corrected. I didn't know what would happen when I walked into your office on Tuesday. You could have had me fired, threatened me, destroyed the evidence. Instead, you listened, and you believed me. Do you know how rare that is? The air between them felt charged suddenly, the late hour and the intimacy of the shared mission creating a connection that Brielle hadn't anticipated. Griffin seemed to feel it too because he cleared his throat and stood up, breaking the moment. It's nearly midnight, he said. You should go home, get some rest. Tomorrow is going to be difficult. I'm calling an emergency board meeting to brief them on the situation and recommend immediate disclosure to the FDA. Will they support you? Brielle asked, standing as well. I don't know, Griffin admitted, but I'm the majority shareholder and I'm not giving them a choice. This ends now, regardless of what it costs the company or me personally. The board meeting on Friday was brutal. Brielle watched via video conference from Griffin's office, seeing the 12 board members react with shock, denial, and in some cases, anger as Griffin presented the findings. Several argued for trying to fix the data quietly and resubmitting, or for burying the whole thing and moving on to other projects. Griffin shut down every suggestion with cold precision. We are reporting this to the FDA today, he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. We are issuing a press release disclosing the fraud and the suspension of cardio-safe development. We are cooperating fully with any investigation, and we are terminating the employment of everyone involved in the falsification, effective immediately. This company was built on the principle of improving lives, not risking them for profit. If you cannot support that, I'll accept your resignation now. No one resigned, but the tension was palpable. The legal ramifications would be enormous. The stock price would crater. The company might not survive, but Griffin didn't flinch. By Friday evening, the news had broken. Every major outlet was running the story of the pharmaceutical scandal and the billionaire CEO who had blown the whistle on his own company. Griffin's phone was ringing constantly with calls from lawyers, investors, journalists, and regulators. Brielle's name had been kept out of the press releases at Griffin's insistence, but she knew it would come out eventually. Go home, Griffin told her as his assistant fielded yet another call. This is going to be a circus for a while, and I want you away from it as much as possible. I'm not leaving you to deal with this alone, Brielle said. This started because I brought you the data. I'm seeing it through. Griffin crossed to where she stood by the window, close enough that she could smell his cologne, cedar, and something darker. Brielle, I'm trying to protect you. When the lawsuits start, when the criminal investigations begin, this is going to get ugly. You gave me the information in good faith. Let me shield you from the worst of it. I don't need shielding, Brielle said, tilting her chin up to meet his eyes. I need to see this through. We're in this together now. Something flared in Griffin's eyes, something that had nothing to do with corporate scandals and everything to do with the way he was looking at her mouth. Together, he repeated, his voice rough. Then he stepped back, breaking the tension. Okay, together. But you're still going home to get some sleep. That's an order from your CEO. Brielle smiled despite everything. Since when do I work for you? I seem to recall being a senior research analyst, not an executive assistant. Since I'm making you the head of the new Research Ethics Oversight Division, Griffin said. Effective Monday, assuming you want the job. Someone has to rebuild the integrity of our research operations. And I can't think of anyone better qualified than the person who risked everything to expose the corruption. The promotion was flattering, but what struck Brielle more was the implication that Griffin saw a future for the company beyond this crisis, and that he wanted her to be part of it. I want the job, she said, and I'll go home. But Griffin, thank you for believing me. Thank you for giving me something to believe in, he said quietly. The weekend brought a firestorm. The FDA announced a formal investigation. The Department of Justice opened a criminal inquiry. Shareholders filed lawsuits. 3 of the executives involved in the fraud were arrested. Brielle's name leaked to the press, and by Sunday evening there were reporters camped outside her apartment building. Griffin called her at 8 p.m., his voice tight with anger. I just saw the news. I'm sending a car to bring you to my place. You can't stay there with that media circus outside. Griffin, I can handle some reporters, Brielle started to say. One of them tried to follow your neighbor into the building claiming to be delivering food, Griffin interrupted. This is beyond typical journalism. Pack a bag. The car will be there in 20 minutes. Brielle wanted to argue, to insist she could take care of herself, but the truth was the attention was overwhelming and frightening. Okay, she agreed. Thank you. Griffin's penthouse was in a building with security that actually worked. A sleek modern space on the 50th floor with views of the city skyline and furnishings that were somehow both expensive and comfortable. He answered the door himself, dressed casually in jeans and a dark sweater that made him look younger and even more attractive than he did in his suits. Guest room is down that hall, second door on the right, he said, taking her bag. You'll have privacy and space. I have a home office on the other side of the apartment, so I won't be in your way. Make yourself comfortable. The kitchen is fully stocked. Help yourself to anything. I feel like I'm imposing, Brielle said, following him through the expansive living room. You're not. Griffin set her bag down in a beautifully appointed bedroom with its own attached bathroom. You're surviving a situation that I inadvertently put you in by not having better oversight of my own company. This is the least I can do. They ordered pizza, because neither of them felt like cooking, and ended up sitting on Griffin's couch, eating and talking while a baseball game played on mute on the television. Brielle learned that Griffin had played baseball in college, that he still worked out every morning at 5 a.m. to clear his head, that he had a younger sister who was a doctor doing humanitarian work in Africa and whom he clearly adored. She's going to love you, Griffin said, then seemed to catch himself. I mean, when she hears about what you did, Sarah is all about integrity and standing up for what's right. She gave up a lucrative surgical practice to go work in places where people have no medical care at all. She sounds amazing, Brielle said, noting the way Griffin had corrected himself but not pushing it. You two must be close. She's the best person I know, Griffin said simply. When our parents died, she's what kept me grounded. She reminds me what actually matters." He looked at Brielle, his expression serious. "You remind me of her, actually. That same moral clarity, that unwillingness to compromise on what's right even when it costs you." "I'm not sure I'm that noble," Brielle said. "I was terrified when I came to your office. I'm still terrified, honestly. This whole thing is so much bigger than I anticipated." "But you did it anyway," Griffin said. "That's what courage is, being afraid and doing the right thing regardless." He was sitting close to her on the couch, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, see the flecks of darker blue in his gray eyes. "Brielle, I need to tell you something, and I need you to know I'm not saying this because of the situation or because you're staying here. But working with you this week, seeing your integrity and your intelligence, the way you fight for what matters, I haven't been able to stop thinking about you. And I know this is terrible timing with everything that's happening, but I don't want to let this moment pass without being honest." Brielle's heart was racing. "Griffin, you don't have to say anything," he continued. "I just needed you to know. When this settles down, when the investigations are over and the dust clears, I would like to take you to dinner. A real dinner, not takeout in my office or pizza on my couch. I'd like to see where this connection between us could go, if you're interested." Brielle looked at this man who had risked his entire company, his reputation, everything he had built, because she had walked into his office and told him the truth. Who had believed her without question, who had protected her without being asked, who had become someone she thought about constantly over the past 5 days. "I'm interested," she said softly. "I've been interested since you plugged in that flash drive and started asking questions instead of making excuses. You could have buried this, Griffin. Instead, you did the right thing, and that's not something I take lightly." Griffin's smile was genuine, transforming his usually serious face. "Then we'll get through this mess together, and when we come out the other side, we'll figure out what this is between us." "Together," Brielle agreed, and when Griffin reached out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek, she leaned into the touch. They didn't kiss that night, though Brielle could feel the pull between them. It was too soon, too complicated with her staying in his home and the scandal exploding around them. But something had shifted, an acknowledgement that what they were building was more than just a professional alliance. The next 3 weeks were a blur of depositions, interviews with federal investigators, emergency meetings with lawyers, and constant media coverage. Ellington Pharmaceuticals' stock price dropped 40%. 2 more executives were arrested. The FDA announced that several other drugs previously approved based on trials run by the same research team would be reviewed. Griffin was praised in some quarters for his transparency, and condemned in others for not preventing the fraud in the first place. Through it all, he remained steady, taking responsibility while also making clear that the actual perpetrators would face full accountability. Brielle became the face of the whistleblower, the researcher who had risked everything to expose the truth. She gave interviews at Griffin's request, because he wanted the world to know that there were people of integrity at Ellington. She testified before an FDA panel about what she had found, and how she had tried to report it internally. And through everything, Griffin was there, a steady presence, supporting her when the pressure felt overwhelming. They fell into a routine of sorts. Brielle stayed at Griffin's penthouse because the media attention at her apartment didn't let up. They would work during the day, dealing with the constant crisis management, then come home in the evening and decompress together. Griffin cooked surprisingly well, and they would make dinner together, talking about everything except the scandal. They watched movies, argued about baseball teams, and slowly revealed more of themselves to each other. Brielle learned that Griffin had a dry sense of humor that only emerged when he was relaxed, that he was terrible at sitting still, that he read voraciously, and had opinions on everything from economics to architecture. Griffin learned that Brielle was competitive about board games, that she had wanted to be an astronaut as a kid, that she loved thunderstorms and old jazz music, and had a gift for explaining complex scientific concepts in ways anyone could understand. And beneath it all was the growing awareness that what they felt for each other was becoming impossible to ignore. The way Griffin looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching, the way Brielle found excuses to be near him, the accidental touches that lingered too long, the conversations that stretched past midnight because neither wanted to say goodnight. 5 weeks after Brielle had walked into Griffin's office, the Department of Justice announced indictments for 8 former Ellington executives on charges of fraud, conspiracy, and making false statements to federal regulators. The same day, the FDA issued a statement commending Ellington's current leadership for their cooperation and transparency, and announcing that the company's other approved drugs had been reviewed and found to be properly validated. It wasn't complete vindication, but it was a turning point. That evening, Griffin came home with a bottle of champagne and actual smiles on his face. "The board meeting this afternoon was almost pleasant," he told Brielle. "Our stock price started recovering. 3 companies have reached out about partnerships, wanting to work with us specifically because of how we handled this crisis. We're going to survive this." "You're going to survive this," Brielle corrected. "You saved the company by being willing to tear it down to fix it." Griffin set the champagne down and crossed to where she stood in the kitchen. "We survived this. I couldn't have done any of it without you, Brielle. You were the one with the courage to speak up. You gave me the chance to make this right." "You believed me," Brielle said, her voice catching slightly. "Do you know how significant that was? I spent 3 weeks being dismissed and shut down by people who should have listened. And you, who had the most to lose, heard me out and trusted that I was telling the truth. That meant everything." Griffin reached up, cupping her face gently in both hands. "I believed the data because it was solid, but I believed you because when I looked at you, I saw someone who cared more about doing right than protecting herself. That's rare, Brielle. You're rare." His thumbs brushed along her cheekbones, his eyes searching hers. "I know I said we'd wait until this was over to figure out what this is between us, but I don't want to wait anymore. I'm falling in love with you. I think I started falling the moment you set that flash drive on my desk and risked everything for people you'd never meet. And every day since then, I've fallen harder." Brielle felt tears spring to her eyes because this man, this brilliant, strong, honorable man, had seen her at her most vulnerable and had stood beside her through everything. "I'm falling in love with you too," she whispered. "You make me believe in good men, in people who have power and use it for the right reasons. You make me want to be braver than I am." "You're the bravest person I know," Griffin said, and then he was kissing her finally, a kiss that felt like coming home and starting an adventure all at once. Brielle wrapped her arms around his neck, pressing closer, and Griffin's arms came around her waist, holding her tight against him. The kiss deepened, all the weeks of tension and attraction and growing love pouring into this moment. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Griffin rested his forehead against hers. "Stay," he said. "Not because of the media or convenience, but because I want you here, because I want to wake up with you and come home to you and build a life together." "Yes," Brielle said, kissing him again because she could now, because this extraordinary man was hers and she was his. Yes to all of it. They opened the champagne and toasted to surviving the scandal, to new beginnings, to finding each other in the midst of chaos. And when Griffin took her hand and led her to his bedroom, his eyes asking permission even as his body made clear what he wanted, Brielle went willingly, ready to write the next chapter of their story together. The next morning, Brielle woke up in Griffin's arms, early sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, and felt completely at peace for the first time in months. Griffin was already awake, watching her with an expression so tender it made her chest ache. "Good morning," he said, his voice rough with sleep. "Good morning," Brielle replied, snuggling closer into his warmth. "This is a good look for you, relaxed and happy." "I am happy," Griffin said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Happier than I've been in years, maybe ever. You did that." "We did that," Brielle corrected. "Together, remember?" "Together," Griffin agreed and sealed the promise with a kiss. Over the next several months, they rebuilt both the company and their lives. Brielle took over as head of research ethics oversight and implemented sweeping reforms to prevent anything like the cardio-safe scandal from ever happening again. Griffin worked with the board to restructure the company's priorities, putting patient safety ahead of profit timelines, and the market responded positively. The company not only recovered but thrived, with several major new partnerships and a reputation as an industry leader in ethical research practices. Their relationship deepened as they navigated both the professional challenges and the personal joy of falling more in love. They kept the relationship quiet at work for a few months to avoid any suggestion that Brielle's position was due to favoritism. But eventually, Griffin made it clear to the board that he and Brielle were together, and that anyone who had a problem with it could deal with him directly. No one objected, particularly since Brielle had proven herself to be exceptional at her job and had earned the respect of the entire research division. Griffin's sister Sarah came home for Christmas and did indeed love Brielle immediately. The three of them spent the holiday at Griffin's penthouse, cooking and laughing and sharing stories, and Sarah pulled Brielle aside at one point to say, "I haven't seen my brother this happy since before our parents died. Thank you for giving him that." "He gave me everything too," Brielle said, watching Griffin build a fire in the fireplace, his shirt sleeves rolled up, and his face relaxed in a way she knew he only looked around people he trusted completely. On New Year's Eve, Griffin took Brielle to the place where it all started, his office at Ellington, now empty and quiet after hours. He led her to the window where he had been standing the first time she saw him, and wrapped his arms around her from behind, both of them looking out at the city lights. "A year ago tonight, I was standing here alone, thinking about whether I had made a mistake taking over this company, wondering if I was living up to what my father wanted," Griffin said quietly. "I had no idea that in 8 weeks, a brilliant woman with incredible courage was going to walk into my life and change everything." Brielle turned in his arms to face him. "I had no idea that the intimidating billionaire CEO I was about to accuse of running a corrupt company would turn out to be the best man I've ever known and the love of my life." Griffin smiled, that full, genuine smile that still made her heart skip. "I want to do this right," he said, and then he was kneeling, pulling a small box from his pocket. "Brielle Garrison, you are brilliant, brave, and beautiful. You have challenged me to be better, to live up to the ideals I claimed to have but wasn't always following through on. You make me laugh, you make me think, and you make me want to be worthy of you every single day. Will you marry me?" Brielle felt tears streaming down her face, happy tears this time, pure joy. "Yes," she said, pulling him back to his feet so she could kiss him. "Yes, absolutely yes." The ring was perfect, an emerald surrounded by diamonds, the green stone the exact color of her eyes. Griffin slid it onto her finger, then kissed her again as midnight struck and fireworks exploded over the city outside, celebrating the new year and their new beginning. They were married 6 months later in a private ceremony at a vineyard in Napa Valley, with Sarah as Brielle's maid of honor and Griffin's college best friend as his best man. The guest list was small, just family and close friends, because what mattered to both of them was the commitment they were making to each other, not the spectacle. Brielle wore a simple, elegant gown, and when Griffin saw her walking down the aisle between the rows of grapevines, his eyes filled with tears. "You're everything," he told her when she reached him, taking her hands. "You're my everything," Brielle replied. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, promises about believing in each other, standing together through whatever came, choosing courage and integrity and love every day. When the officiant pronounced them married and Griffin kissed her, Brielle thought about how far they had come from that first terrifying meeting in his office, how a moment of courage and his decision to believe her had led to this perfect day. The reception was joyful and relaxed, full of laughter and dancing and toasts that made them both cry happy tears. Sarah gave a speech about how Brielle had given her brother back his faith in goodness. Griffin's best friend told embarrassing college stories. And when Griffin and Brielle took the floor for their first dance, swaying together to a jazz standard that had become their song, Brielle whispered, "I would do it all again, every scary moment if it led me to you." "I would believe you every time," Griffin whispered back. "Believing you was the easiest and best decision I ever made. Because believing you meant trusting you, and trusting you meant knowing you, and knowing you meant falling completely in love with you." They honeymooned in Italy. 2 weeks of exploring ancient cities, eating incredible food, and simply enjoying being together without the pressure of work and scandal, and everything that had defined the first year of their relationship. They walked through vineyards and toured museums and spent lazy mornings in bed, learning each other's bodies and hearts in ways that deepened their bond even more. When they returned, they moved into a new house they had bought together, a beautiful modern home with space for the life they wanted to build. Brielle continued transforming the research division at Ellington, building a reputation as one of the most ethical and rigorous oversight directors in the industry. She spoke at conferences, published papers on research integrity, and became a voice for whistleblower protections. Griffin continued leading the company with the values they had fought so hard to uphold, and Ellington became a case study in how to recover from scandal and emerge stronger. 2 years after they married, Brielle discovered she was pregnant. She told Griffin on a Sunday morning, handing him the positive test while they were still in bed, watching his face transform from confusion to realization to pure joy in the span of seconds. "We're having a baby," he said, his voice awed. "We're having a baby," Brielle confirmed, laughing as Griffin gathered her into his arms, holding her with a gentleness that made her fall in love with him all over again. Their daughter was born on a crisp October morning, a healthy, beautiful girl with dark hair and her mother's green eyes. They named her Caroline Grace, after both their mothers, and Griffin held her in the hospital room with tears streaming down his face, looking at Brielle with such overwhelming love and gratitude that she felt her heart might burst. "Thank you," he said, "for all of it. For being brave enough to fight for what was right, for giving me the chance to be better, for choosing to love me, for giving me this incredible gift. You've made my life extraordinary." "You made my life extraordinary too," Brielle said, watching her husband with their daughter, this family they had built from courage and trust, and a decision to believe when it would have been easier not to. "That day I walked into your office, I was so scared. But you believed me, and that changed everything." Believing you was believing in something good, Griffin said, sitting on the edge of her hospital bed, Caroline cradled carefully in his arms. And loving you has been the greatest adventure of my life. As Brielle looked at her husband and daughter, she thought about the journey that had brought them here. How a moment of courage had led to a decision to trust, and that trust had blossomed into the deepest love she had ever known. How Griffin had proven that power and integrity could coexist, that doing the right thing mattered more than profit or reputation, that believing in someone could change both their lives forever. 3 years later, their son was born, a boy they named James Griffin, who had his father's eyes and smile. Caroline was a devoted big sister, constantly checking on her baby brother and telling him stories. They moved to a bigger house with a yard where the kids could play, filled it with love and laughter, and the kind of family life both Griffin and Brielle had dreamed of. Ellington Pharmaceuticals continued to thrive under Griffin's leadership, and Brielle's ethics division became a model that other companies studied and tried to replicate. They worked together, building something that mattered, creating a legacy that was about more than just business success, but about doing good in the world. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Griffin took Brielle back to his office building, up to that same floor where it had all started. They stood at the window together, his arms around her, looking out at the city. "5 years ago, you walked through that door and changed my life," Griffin said. "You gave me the chance to be the man I wanted to be, to run this company the way it should be run, to prove that we could do well by doing good. And you gave me a love I didn't know existed, a family that makes everything else worthwhile. I believed you that day, Brielle, but what I didn't realize until later was that believing you meant opening my heart to you, and that was the beginning of everything." Brielle turned in his arms, reaching up to cup his face in her hands. "You showed me what it meant to be truly believed in, to have someone stand beside me no matter what it cost them. You showed me that love could be steady and strong and built on mutual respect and trust. You gave me everything I never knew I needed." They kissed there in the empty office, the lights of the city spreading out below them, two people who had found each other in the midst of crisis and built something beautiful from courage and faith. Believing had meant loving, and loving had meant everything. Their life continued to unfold in wonderful ways. Caroline grew into a thoughtful, intelligent child who loved science like her mother and had her father's determination. James was energetic and curious, always asking questions and exploring the world around him. Family dinners were filled with conversation and debate, with Griffin and Brielle teaching their children about integrity and standing up for what was right, about being kind and brave and thoughtful. On weekends, they would sometimes drive out to the vineyard where they had married, walking through the same paths, remembering their wedding day and all the moments that had led them there. They talked about everything the way they always had, their connection as strong as ever, deepened by shared experience and unwavering trust. "You ever regret it?" Griffin asked her one afternoon as they watched Caroline and James play in the grass. "Coming to me that day, blowing the whistle. Your career could have taken a completely different path." "Never," Brielle said without hesitation. "Not for a single second. Everything good in my life came from that decision. My work has meaning because of what we built together. And I have you and our family, which is worth more than any alternative career path could have been. Do you ever regret believing me? It cost you millions in stock value, nearly destroyed your company, put you through years of investigation and lawsuits." Griffin pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "Believing you was the best decision I ever made. It saved my company in the ways that actually matter. And it gave me you, which makes everything else irrelevant. I'd lose every penny I have if it meant having you and our life together." As the sun set over the vineyard, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Griffin and Brielle watched their children play, holding hands the way they always did, connected by a bond that had been forged in crisis and tempered by love. They had built something real, something lasting, something that started with courage and trust and had grown into a life filled with meaning and joy. Years later, when Caroline was preparing to go to college and studying bioethics, inspired by her mother's work, she asked Brielle about how she and Griffin had met. Brielle told her the whole story, not leaving out the fear or the risk or the uncertainty, wanting her daughter to understand that doing the right thing was rarely easy but always worthwhile. "So Dad believed you immediately?" Caroline asked, "even though it could have ruined him." "He believed me," Brielle confirmed. "And that belief, that trust, it changed both our lives. It showed me what kind of man he was, and it opened his heart to me. We fell in love through that experience, through standing together and fighting for what was right." "That's the most romantic thing I've ever heard," Caroline said, smiling. "It's like a fairy tale except real." "It was real," Brielle agreed. "The best real thing that ever happened to me." That night, lying in bed with Griffin after Caroline and James were both asleep, Brielle reflected on how their story had unfolded. From that terrifying walk into his office to this peaceful moment decades later, from whistleblower and CEO to partners and lovers and parents and best friends. "What are you thinking about?" Griffin asked, pulling her closer. "Us," Brielle said. "How believing led to loving, and loving led to this beautiful life we've built. How one moment of courage and your decision to trust me created everything we have now." "Believing you was easy," Griffin said. "Loving you was inevitable. You walked into my life and showed me what integrity looked like in action, and I fell in love with that courage, that strength, that absolute refusal to compromise on what mattered. And every day since, you've given me more reasons to love you." "You showed me what it meant to be truly believed," Brielle said. "To have someone stand beside you no matter what, to be a partner in every sense of the word. You've given me a life beyond anything I imagined that day when I was so scared walking into your office." Griffin kissed her, soft and sweet and filled with decades of love. "Here's to courage," he said, "and trust and believing in each other and all the years still to come." "All the years to come," Brielle agreed, settling into his arms, completely content, completely loved, completely home. Their story had started with a flash drive and a decision to believe, and it had grown into something extraordinary. A love built on trust and courage, tested by crisis and proven by time, resulting in a family and a life that honored everything they had fought for. Griffin had learned that believing in someone, truly believing in them, meant opening your heart to them completely. And in that opening, in that trust, they had found a love that lasted a lifetime.